This week, California superintendents push back on the governor's electric school bus mandate. Could the voters of Kentucky amend their constitution for school choice? And small business owners sound the alarm on the unrealistic expectations of college grads. These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at readlion.com. Michael Ryan, executive editor of The Lion. Josh Mann, managing editor. And Faith Perkins, staff writer at The Lion. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
We are in a record cold, deep freeze in much of the country. Faith, something like 75%, I read this week, of the country will, at some point, experience sub-zero temperatures. One of the most interesting stories this week was in the Chicagoland area. The electric car, Teslas, couldn't charge. They just wouldn't work. And so you wrote a story this week, not related to the cold, but it brings to mind that story, the cold, when I see the headline, Back to the Pony Express, California superintendents criticize expensive electric bus school mandates. I'm thinking about the cold and the functionality, but it's also very expensive.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so the California Governor Newsom actually signed the bill directing that all buses after 2035 be electric, and the superintendents are pushing back because it's not feasible. Mainly because they only charge for 93 miles at one charge, and several superintendents are saying they go over 160 miles one way for away games. And then other superintendents report their buses are catching on fire.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Michael.
No problem there.
Yeah, so they don't start in the cold, they catch fire when it's not cold, I guess, Michael.
It's something. And you mentioned the problems that EVs are having in the cold.
Yep.
There was a story in the New York Post and elsewhere about the situation in Chicago over the last frigid few days. And this story says, desperate Tesla owners in and around Chicago were seen trying to charge their vehicles with no luck amid frigid temperatures that have gripped the Midwest. Charging stations have essentially turned into car graveyards. One guy says, nothing, no juice, still on 0%. And this is like 3 hours being out here, and after being out here 3 hours yesterday. I mean, you want to do that with a bus full of kids?
It's stunning. And Faith, I don't know if you had this in your story. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you have any rough guesstimate on what an electric bus costs, or do we even know?
Yeah, it's $433,000, twice as much as a regular bus.
Oh my gosh. Josh, I would not guess that's walking around money for most public school districts.
Yeah, and I mean, California does spend a lot more than a lot of states on public education. And yet you see the ways that these government mandates kind of come in, and it's a one-size-fits-all, and especially the superintendents in the rural areas are saying, look, this doesn't work for us. Some of the critics aren't necessarily opposed to other kinds of vehicle technologies or electrification in general, but I think it's, it's kind of one of these big government things where when the government comes in with a mandate, they don't think about all the different scenarios.
And this is a test of mandates' ability to pull the future into the current time. I mean, can the government take future technology and mandate it now?
And Faith, it's not even necessarily that the superintendents object to the technology. From a political point of view, they probably like it, but they just don't have the money.
Yes, and a lot of them are getting grants, but even the ones that are getting grants are turning it down just because they don't want their kids left on the side of the road in the cold.
So you think it's more a function problem than even a money problem for a lot of them?
Yes, because the state's willing to foot the bill.
Oh, okay. Well, wow, that is something. So we'll continue to follow that at the Lion. Meanwhile, out in Connecticut, Josh, a Connecticut teacher denounced for mandatory privilege training. She's now suing a school board because she says they retaliated. She didn't want to participate.
Yeah, it's actually, his name's John Grand. He taught PE for Hartford Public Schools for 35 years. So this is a veteran teacher, and he was subjected to some privilege training. This was mandatory training given to staff at a school. What he says in his lawsuit, he's since sued, is that the presentation was critical of straight white Christian males, all of which he is, by the way. And when participants were invited to discuss the presentation, he simply replied, "I was just man-bashed and white-shamed. I'm going to sit here quietly." in the end, the school opened an investigation but didn't tell him they were investigating him. He took some leaves of absence, and it created a stressful environment, his suit alleges, and so he is seeking some monetary damages as well as, in part, for the violation of his First and 14th Amendment rights.
Faith, you wrote this story as well, if memory serves.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, he did not lose his job. He just said they made it very uncomfortable for him while he was there.
Yes, they threatened him with termination, but he was the only one that they went after, and other people spoke out at the meeting.
Michael, how likely is it that he'll be successful, do you suppose?
Well, is he suing? I don't know.
He is suing, yes.
So, yeah, I think it's very likely. We see these cases popping up all over the country, and how many more people aren't pressing these cases? How many more people are just doing what the government says? These are serious cases of historic violations of our basic freedoms and our basic human rights. It's the government attempting to fix quote unquote, how we think and speak. It's mindful of re-education camps. It's a form of forced psychiatric treatment to tell somebody you're biased, you need fixing, you may not even know it, but here's the fix.
It kind of goes hand in glove with the next story, Michael, and I'd love for you to comment on pushing transgenderism and race in both hospitals and classrooms. A former surgeon is saying that he was forced to push trans procedures on kids or advocate for them. We're hearing this a lot in children's hospitals in particular, that this is a big boon economically for them, something like $1 billion industry so far.
Yeah, it is, and you got to follow the money. There was a report about, you're talking about Texas Children's Hospital?
That's right.
There was a news report about the law that banned minor surgeries and treatments for transgender, and see if you can detect the bias in this news report. Governor Greg Abbott signs legislation barring trans youth from accessing transition-related care. Texas joins 17 other states restricting transgender minors from accessing puberty blockers and hormone therapies, as if we're trying to stop them from getting to a water fountain or something else that they have a right to. Imagine lamenting a ban on children accessing alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
That's a great point, Josh. It seems that we've done previous shows when we've talked about this issue. Europe, Western Europe, who embraced this whole cultural transition concept years before the United States, now they seem to be leading the charge to say we're not allowing this with youth. So here again, it seems like we're following Western Europe in many ways.
Yeah, they're starting to hit the brakes on some things because their studies are showing that the treatments don't actually do all the things that they promise to do, that the mental health outcomes are actually pretty poor for a lot of these kids. And never mind the fact that the treatments are irreversible in many cases. And so these minors potentially have life-altering, irreversible side effects that are negative and sometimes terribly so. This particular doctor also says he's a former surgeon, but he became a whistleblower. And he says that the DOJ actually now is investigating him.
Wow.
Under they say it has something to do with medical records. So when he blew the whistle on Texas Children's Hospital, or whichever hospital it was, he shared some documents, some medical records, but they were he made sure that names were redacted, et cetera. But the DOJ is coming after him, and in his view, they're coming after him for political reasons. Something he said that I thought was really interesting. He's got two concerns, he says, about what is going on, bigger picture. One is that there's this push for ideology over evidence, that it's more about the party line and not the evidence, medical evidence, for example. And then along with that, it's censorship. If you don't agree with the ideology, never mind the evidence, then you're censored. And so he feels like both are going on. And I think that's what's particularly chilling about kind of the bigger picture.
Yeah, Faith, we seem to have this running theme with medicine now even being politicized. It reminds me a lot of COVID. If you didn't necessarily agree with how it was caught or spread or how severe it was, whether masks worked, whether shots worked, a lot of doctors at that time felt like they had to stand in line and toe the line and say yes, yes, yes on all of those fronts, or else. Same thing with this issue, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And like same with like the government jobs. As a military member, we were forced to get a bunch of vaccinations and do certain things as well.
And Michael, of course, the current administration, the Labor Department, they attempted to use the Labor Department to mandate shots at one point. Ultimately, I think the Supreme Court threw that out. But one wonders if that's coming around the pike for this transgender surgery stuff and procedural stuff for minors. I don't know how many children's hospitals are doing it, by the way, in the country. You think it's most?
I wouldn't say it's most, but it's going on quite a bit. Yeah. And states are having to take action to address that situation. Although in California, there's a strange situation where California is looking at banning tackle football for young kids, but they're almost mandating sex change operations or treatments for parents, even if they don't want to do it.
Another great story. This is at least for those who would advocate for school choice, this is another great story out of Kentucky, Josh. Kentucky lawmakers introducing a pro-school choice constitutional amendment. Explain it, and how successful might they be?
Yeah, well, the success remains to be seen, but I think it's got a good chance. There's 15 Republican lawmakers proposing this constitutional amendment. One side advantage is that should it pass, it does not need to go through the governor, who is likely to veto any school choice legislation. It would go directly to the people for a vote. And so the people of Kentucky, who seem to support school choice measures based on polls, would be able to vote for this. It seems like a reasonable thing to ask. Let's take it to the people. Let's see what they think. And so we'll see what it does. Essentially, the importance of the amendment is that some state constitutions have language in them about, in Kentucky, they're called common schools. There's a question, what is a common school? And it's generally understood to be a public school. Well, can you use state dollars for other kinds of schools? That's the question. This amendment would do the very small thing of just helping clarify that it would basically remove an obstacle. So it doesn't mandate ESAs per se, but it does remove some obstacles for school choice. Should it pass.
I don't know how many states have ever done this. It comes to my mind that most states, when you're talking about school choice, it's all done through the legislature and a governor signing it or not signing it. I don't know that I've ever heard of a state putting it on a ballot. Have you, Faith?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I think Kentucky might be the first, Michael.
It may be, and it's a way to go around the governor on this situation. But it's also a way to clarify that you have educational freedom in Kentucky. And it's clear also, the way that it's being done, that the funding would not come from common schools or public schools. This would be unique funding for these schools. And there is great support. I mean, overall support in Kentucky for education freedom stands at 74%, 62% Democrats.
And it amazes me, that stat, and I've shared with you, I think in previous shows, New York has the largest growth of homeschooling anywhere in the country, New York City. I wonder if this issue were put on the ballot in every state, is there a single state that would say no to it? I bet not. I bet it would be overwhelmingly passed everywhere, would be my guess.
Well, a national poll indicates that 67% nationally approve of education freedom.
Wow. To higher education now, this is an interesting survey. I'll start with you, Faith, because you're the youngest on the panel, bragger. 9 in 10 small businesses think recent college graduates have unrealistic expectations. I don't know what you know. I know you're a hard worker. That's not you, but you with maybe people who have recently come out of college. You maybe read a little about this survey. Is that a fair representation of younger people who are fresh out of college, do you think? Unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I think it goes to show that colleges aren't preparing students for the real world and working. And the survey highlights that like the 3 areas in which the employees and employers are like the most diverse is going to be like salary, work hours, and then like the difficulty of work.
Yeah, Josh, that seems to be something I talk with people that are in the employment business all the time. There is a new generational expectation that you've got to devolve and bring your standards down to the employees level if you want to keep them happy and keep them around.
Yeah, I want to get paid a lot of money, and I want it to be easy. I mean, and isn't that what real life is like?
Sure.
Well, not at college, apparently. And I think, we're writing stories about grade inflation. In fact, we might talk about one today. And so there is pressure to make college easy. I mean, and it costs a lot of money, and whether it's the kids taking out student loans or their parents paying for it, you want them to be happy. And then they fly through this college experience, and they are unprepared. What shocked me was, as a result, 80% of these businesses in the survey said that they no longer are weighing college degrees like they used to. In other words, the college degree, 80% of them say, it's not going to get you the job. It's not going to be a major factor. And so that is a huge change.
Well, in fact, those 80% say a degree makes no difference and can even be a detriment to being hired.
Oh, wow.
Which is really remarkable. I mean, that's a lot of tuition down the drain.
Yes.
But, it's one of the reasons that trade school is coming back.
Walmart is interestingly taking a new approach to hiring even executive level people. They're saying we're going to do away with the traditional college degree. We can train you in-house, which I wonder if that's going to be a new direction. A Chick-fil-A franchisee owner I talked with once said that it's to the point with him, if a young person shows up on time or early, is willing to stay late and does a modicum of regular hard work, that will propel you. It's so rare, said this person, amongst young people, that they showing up late, showing up when you want to, working the hours you want to, or not at all, that's kind of become commonplace.
Makes it easy to stand out if you do show up on time.
Yeah, that's right. And then finally, Michael, an Atlanta professor, inflating grades at an HBCU, that's a historically black college or university. And it's interesting, I saw a poll this week that said 52% of blacks now believe that affirmative action in admissions in college is out of line. They don't like it, which I think is an interesting new trend.
Yeah, it's not surprising, although this is not a historically black college problem. This is a higher education problem and, in fact, a secondary schooling problem, grade inflation. But in college, there's a financial incentive for this to be going on. Number one, if you're an easy grade as a professor, you get better reviews. And if you get better reviews, you get more students. And if your department and your classes get more students, that's more money and more power with the administration. Students mean cash. It's as simple as that. And colleges want cash more than anything.
This Harvard situation that we've talked about in previous shows, and Claudine Gay, the president, and the plagiarism, that seems to have been another one of these bubble-popping moments, perhaps.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of trends. I mean, I think COVID disrupted education from the earliest ages through higher education. But also there was this bubble that, bubbles burst eventually. And I think my understanding is that grade inflation is a fairly linear trend over 50 years. And so it's steadily been rising, but seems to have come to this point of, wait a minute, if businesses don't consider this degree and the cost of a degree has so far outpaced inflation, it's absurd. It's 4-digit % increase.
Stunning.
Inflation. Then why on earth do you pay that money to get a degree that won't get you the job, and then you can't pay back your loans? I mean, it's really silly.
And it's been devalued so greatly. People that are not nearly performing as well as maybe you would, they're getting the same grades for less output.
Yeah, and it's a facade. Still, the college, the degree, the diploma, the hat, it all symbolizes this achievement idea. Let me read to you what this professor wrote in an op-ed. He said, even after receiving the normal grade inflation, so he said the kids were still getting grade inflation, like everybody, including his own in his class. He said students demanded yet higher grades and revolted when I wouldn't go along. To my astonishment, the students went above me to Spelman's administration, which capitulated without ever telling me. So the administrators actually said, yeah, we'll give you higher grades. Didn't even tell this professor. And because I refused, he goes on, to look the other way, I lost my job.
It reminds me of like the higher education equivalent, Michael, of the housing bubble of 2008. It's like education has now become housing of 2008, Same thing. Huge cost, huge price, huge debt, and it's not real anymore.
No, and it gives the students a lot of power. I mean, when you can basically force a college to change your grade because the teacher's too hard on you, that's really having the inmates run the asylum, right? Yeah. I remember years ago there was a little fad. It wasn't a trend. It was just a fad of high schools and other schools issuing warranties, a guarantee that their graduates are ready. They're college ready. They're work ready. Well, that didn't last very long. And what we're seeing now with grade inflation propping up students who may or may not know the material, that's the opposite, absolute opposite of giving a guarantee, isn't it?
Before we wrap, I always like to ask the panel their favorite stories. They're cranking out stories every day, dozens a week. But I always like them to zero in on one that's of particular interest to them. So, Faith, I'll start with you. What's cooking at the Lion that interests you the most this week?
Yeah, so the one that actually interested me the most was the surgeon and the whistleblower. I just thought that was really interesting that he was getting prosecuted and not the hospital. That's
what's so great at the Lion. As we say, you write about the culture. You write about a lot of things happening, both in public education, out in the hospital, and in the private sector. It's good stuff. Michael, how about you?
Well, I like it anytime the government tries to silence us. So there's a couple of stories that we just talked about where the government is trying to do that. There was a phenomenon in the colonial America in the 1700s called seditious libel. And that was a law that said you cannot criticize the king or the royal governor, right? And so people in early America, they were fined, they were jailed, they were flogged, put in stocks, whatever, because they criticized the government. And in many ways, this is what we're bringing back, with the censorship of conservatives online, with what they're trying to do to teachers and coaches who speak out against some of this indoctrination that's going on. So it's an amazing phenomenon, and in many ways, it's being recycled from the 1700s.
Josh Mann, your favorite this week?
Yeah, I want to anticipate one. So about the time this episode airs, we're going to be carrying an article on March for Life, which is happening in D.C., and we're going to have a few articles around this topic, and one that's interesting, we're going to ask some Gen Zers about why they're pro-life, because a lot of their peers are not. And so you can look forward to that coming soon on the Lion.
Particularly in the post-Roe versus Wade era, which is going to be a fascinating element too. Panel, thank you. Great conversation as always. That's going to do it for us this week. Be sure and keep up to date on all the latest news every day at readlion.com. For all of us at the Lion, thanks for downloading the show. See you next time.